our brain and all of our body tissues, our whole system runs on glucose. So it's really, really important, first of all, that we're eating well enough to make sure we've got enough to run well. But also what our body does is any excess that we don't use, it stores it as fat. There's two hormones that regulate this. Insulin takes up blood sugar from our bloodstream after we've eaten and helps store the blood sugar as something we call glycogen in the muscles. And it also helps absorb the sugar so that the excess energy can be stored as fat. That's really helpful in case we were ever to get ill, prolonged illness, that kind of thing. It's like an energy store. Our body's designed to do that. There's another hormone called glucagon, which helps us release glucose when we're exercising, for example, or doing anything else to so that we can function well, so that our body's got enough blood sugar to function well with. What's really important, though, is that we regulate our blood sugar well. Okay, so somebody who's diabetic, there's two types of diabetes, type 1 and type 2. Type 1 diabetics don't produce enough insulin, so they need to normally take insulin as an injectable form. Well, there's other ways to take it now as well, but generally what they need to do is make sure they're taking insulin so that they absorb the blood sugar well enough so that their blood sugar doesn't go too high on an ongoing basis. Type 2 diabetics, two aspects to it. First of all, they're not producing enough insulin. Okay, so the blood sugar is generally tending to rise too high in the bloodstream and it's staying at those levels for too long. Secondly, the insulin that they do have, their body tissues aren't responding to it well enough. Okay, and that's called insulin sensitivity. So that reduces what little insulin they are producing. The body's just not responding to it well enough to actually absorb the blood sugar into those tissues, into our muscles, to help store that extra blood sugar as fat. When our blood sugar goes too high, we start getting problems. Too much blood sugar in the bloodstream spills out into our body tissues, into areas like the back of the eye, our heart, our liver, gut, kidneys, all sorts of areas we don't want it to be. When the blood sugar is too high in our body tissues, it can also increase our chances of skin infections and other infections. So what happens is the blood sugar spills over, fluid follows, and you tend to find that you start to get very small amounts of swelling in these body tissues. Classically, the story that you hear is somebody who's been diagnosed as diabetic, their blood sugar was out of control. Once you get them back under control, suddenly they realize they can see clearly again. What was happening was blood sugar was spilling into the back of the retina, in the tissue at the back of the eye, which has got millions of rods and cones, the cells that help us interpret visual images, and then our brain converts them so that we understand what we're seeing. That area, the retina, where those crucial cells are, too much swelling, it starts to become blurred. So when the light's hitting it, it's just being sent in all directions. It's just being bent. The angles that the retina normally interprets at, it's all being sent, in the wrong directions. And then we end up in these situations where the retina's too swollen, people are getting blurred vision. As you sort out that blood sugar, as you start to calm it down, get it back to normal levels, the retina goes back to a normal shape. And then diabetics realize they can start seeing again, which is quite a gratifying thing to hear from patients. Also, it gives you an idea of how bad blood sugar levels can affect us. So if you're not diabetic, the main thing is obviously not becoming diabetic. Okay, so that's one side of it. And if you're diabetic, it's a case of controlling it as well as you can. In both situations, the same thing applies. Okay, too much carbohydrate, too much energy food, which gets digested down into blood sugar, things like pasta, potatoes, rice, rotis, chapatis, generally sources of bread, any types of bread. When we digest those down, they become, they break down into glucose. Just to give you an example, some of the foods that you can really underestimate how much sugar is in foods. An average sized jacket potato has actually got 19 teaspoons of blood sugar in it, believe it or not. That's a huge amount of blood sugar. Now, if you've got a very active job, let's say you've got somebody who does manual labor all day, a lot of physical activity, generally they'll burn that off. If you've got somebody like a lot of us, jobs that involve either commuting, sitting on a tube train, driving our cars, working from home, or working in an office, we're not active enough to burn that off. So inevitably what will happen is excess blood sugar gets stored as fat, people start gaining weight. Now, so carbohydrates and simple sugars, they're important to make sure that we don't overdo it with those. Try and moderate those. Protein and fat is more important. Okay, so fats, our body, every single cell in our body is lined by fat. We don't want to have too much bad fat. Good fats, different sources of those. We can talk about that in a separate video. Those are really important. Protein's really important. If you have a good amount of protein intake, your cravings for things like carbohydrates tend to be less. And carbohydrates themselves, if you have too much of them, we tend to process them quite quickly. You get hungry again, which is where you get this kind of cycle of eating too many carbohydrates and then constantly feeling hungry. So carbohydrates and sugars, need to try and limit those. Pasta, rice, potatoes, breads, that kind of thing. The two other things that lifestyle-wise we can do that are really, really important: lots of exercise and managing our weight. Now, obviously, they link in together. Too much body weight inhibits our ability to process blood sugar well. Okay, so what we can do from that point of view, exercise-wise, obviously it links in with weight management. 150 minutes of exercise per week is what is recommended in the UK as a minimum exercise level to generally be healthy. Good fitness, good ability to process blood sugar, keeping us active, keeping our cardiovascular system, our heart and our lungs working well. How you break that down is completely up to you. You can do 5 sets of 30 minutes, so that's 150 minutes of walking a week, cycling, whatever it is that you enjoy. The main thing is to make sure it's active enough. Okay, so you need to be working hard enough that you can't complete anything more than a sentence comfortably while you're doing that exercise. So we call it the talk test. If you're walking and you can comfortably talk for more than a sentence without having to catch your breath, you're probably not working hard enough. On something like a Fitbit, one of the activity trackers, or an Apple Watch, they'll probably be tracked to something like active minutes. So more than 10 minutes before you can count it as proper exercise. A lot of the activity trackers will pick that up. And you need to be doing it at that intensity. Make sure you can pass the talk test. Make sure you can't do more than a sentence without having to catch your breath. Whether you're doing that on the bike, indoor treadmill, outdoors, whatever works for you. Weight management, we need to be looking at, as a really general guide, if you take your height in meters and centimeters, so let's say I'm 1 meters 87 tall. As a general guide, okay, take away the 100, 87 centimeters, convert that into kilograms. My typical healthy weight's around 87 kilograms. So you can normally do that as a straight conversion, and that works for most people. Now, if you want to aim for a kind of a realistic weight, most people are carrying a little bit extra, as I've mentioned before, because of our lifestyles. Someone like me, I shouldn't be aiming for anything more than about 90 or 92 kilograms. There's really good tracker apps, calorie tracker apps that can help us achieve this. MyFitnessPal is a great one. My job's quite sedentary as a GP. If I don't pay attention to making sure I'm getting enough steps in, enough activity, and I can end up putting on weight. I've had to lose 12 kilos on one occasion, 10 on another occasion. Did them both using MyFitnessPal. It works really well. The other good thing with that app is it actually ties in with your activity tracker, so you can get a good idea of how much you're burning and how much you're taking in. So it'll give you an idea of how many calories you should be having in relation to the exercise that you're doing. The thing to bear in mind with activity trackers is they tend to over-exaggerate a little bit how much you're burning. So what I've found is that probably they're counting, if it tells you you've burnt about 600 calories, you probably have burnt about 500. So just take that into account. Normally it's counting about 10 or 20% more than you've actually burnt off. So that's what you should be keeping an eye on.